Russian missile team, low and slow, practically begging to be shot down. The Russians couldn't believe their luck. An Mi-24 Hind loaded with rockets, exposing itself in broad daylight over a quiet 5-sector. It made no tactical sense unless the Ukrainians wanted them to fire. The helicopter's approach over this quiet sector of the front raises immediate questions. Olski has seen minimal activity for months, mostly limited to drone warfare and sporadic artillery exchanges. Yet here, a valuable Mi-24 gunship loaded, with 4 B-8V rocket pods, crosses into contested airspace at a dangerously low altitude on board. Each pod you see here carries 20 S-8 rockets, giving the aircraft a total of 80 unguided projectiles. These 80mm rockets weigh kg each and pack a 1.1 kilo warhead capable of penetrating 400mm of rolled homogeneous armor. But a helicopter loaded down with this much ordnance here is like an NFL player showing up to a peewee football game. It doesn't make any sense. At least it doesn't to the Russians. And that's all that matters. A Russian manpads team positioned in a building, approximately 3.2 kilometers away, has been tracking their approach through binoculars for the past 4 minutes. The two-man team operates a 9K-38 eyeglass surface-to-air missile system, one of Russia's most capable man-portable air defense weapons. The system weighs 17.9 kilo when ready to fire, with its 1.5-meter-long missile carrying a 1.17 kilo warhead containing 390 grams of high explosive, more than enough to turn this high-low into scrap meta. But the explosives aren't the thing the pilots have to worry about. It is this here in the nose. The 9M39 missile's cooled infrared seeker head represents a magnificent advancement over earlier models using nitrogen cooling to reduce sensor noise and increase detection range. This cooling system allows the seeker to differentiate between aircraft, exhaust, and basic flares, at least in theory. And here's where things get interesting. The pilot rolls into his attack dive and unleashes all 80 rockets in a devastating ripple-fire sequence. The rockets streak toward the ground at 610 many-s, spreading across a 500-meter wide impact zone. But something seems wrong with this attack. Many rockets splash harmlessly into the Dnepro River. Others impact empty fields, sending up geysers of mud and debris. The system uses 4 antennas positioned around the aircraft to provide 360-degree coverage, calculating threat bearing with 15-degree accuracy. Its threat library recognizes over 600 different emission signatures, instantly categorizing them by weapon system type. The SPO-15 doesn't just detect threats, it prioritizes them on a 16 LED display showing bearing and threat level while generating specific audio tones for each threat category. A continuous 800 Hz tone indicates radar lock. A pulsing 1600 Hz warns of missile launch, and rapid chirp signal active terminal guidance. In this case, the distinctive high-pitched pulsing tone at 1600 Hz confirms an infrared missile launch, exactly what the pilot was waiting for. Banking hard to the left while simultaneously deploying countermeasures, the Mi-24 releases a precise pattern of 12 infrared flares in rapid succession. The helicopter's UV-26 countermeasures, dispensing system mounted. Here on the aircraft's fuselage contains 192 PPI-26 infrared flares total. These flares burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees C, creating infrared signatures, designed to seduce incoming missiles away from the helicopter's engine exhaust. The timing could not be more perfect. In this instant, the battlefield becomes a thermal nightmare. 80 exploding rockets below create a wall of heat signatures, while 12 fresh flares bloom like false suns above. The missile seeker, designed for a single target, suddenly faces dozens. It's like trying to identify one specific light bulb in Times Square at midnight. Impossible. Each S-8 rocket impact creates a secondary heat bloom that persists for several seconds. The explosive warheads ignite vegetation, fuel, and any combustible materials, generating dozens of infrared sources across the 500-meter impact zone. These ground-level heat signatures, when combined with the helicopter's flares at altitude, create a three-dimensional maze of thermal confusion that no 1980s-era seeker can navigate. The seeker logic lacks the sophistication to discriminate between these signatures. It loses lock on the helicopter and selects the brightest heat source, a cluster of burning rocket impacts 150 meters from the aircraft. The missile streaks harmlessly past the Ukrainian helicopter, close enough for the crew to observe, but far enough to avoid any damage from the proximity fuse. This miss was always the expected outcome. The real victory is what happens next. By firing their missile, the Russian manpads team has just sealed their fate. The launch signature, a brilliant infrared plume visible to multiple sensors, pinpoints their exact position in the building. Ukrainian signals intelligence systems immediately triangulate the launch using the missile's heat signature combined with the electromagnetic emissions from the team's communications equipment. Only a handful strike actual structures. This appears to be area suppression rather than precision targeting, a seemingly wasteful use of munitions in a quiet sector. But this 500-meter spread pattern serves a dual purpose that the Russians don't recognize. Not only does it suppress a wide area, but more importantly, it creates the perfect conditions to force an air defense response. Any manpads team watching this sloppy attack would feel compelled to engage what appears to be an easy target. The Russian manpads team follows their training manual to the letter. Soviet-era doctrine mandates immediate engagement of any aircraft within the Iglas 5.2 kilometer operational range. The gunner checks his weapons parameters one final time. The ILGA can engage targets at speeds up to 800 meters per second at altitudes up to 3.5 km. The Ukrainian helicopter flying low and slow during its attack run is well within range. The gunner aims northeast, an angle that reveals something crucial. The helicopter has deliberately crossed into occupied territory. The Iglas 5.2 kilometer range can't even reach across the Dnipro from this position, meaning the Ukrainians are taking extraordinary risks to ensure the Russians take the bait. What the Russian team fails to consider is why a Ukrainian helicopter would expose itself so brazenly in broad daylight over a sector with known air defense coverage. The Oleski area offers little strategic value, minimal troop concentrations, and no critical infrastructure requiring immediate suppression. The helicopter's route even suggests it may have crossed the Dnipro River into occupied airspace, as the ILGA's 5.2 kilometer range doesn't extend across the water from the Russian position. This tactical choice should trigger alarm bells, but such a tempting target overrides their common sense. It will prove to be their undoing. The bait has been set. And at precisely 2:48 p.m., as the last of the S-8 rockets impact below, the Russian operator squeezes the trigger. The Iglas infrared seeker has locked onto the Mi-24's engine exhaust signature and the missile. Solid fuel rocket motor ignites with a distinctive white flash visible for kilometers. The missile accelerates to approximately Mach 1.9, streaking toward its target with its cooled infrared seeker, maintaining lock despite the afternoon sun. The Ukrainian pilot's SPO-15 Berioza radar warning receiver immediately alerts him to the launch, though his reaction suggests he was 544 expecting it. The SPO-15 operates across 547, multiple frequency bands from 0.66 to 17 GHz, detecting electromagnetic emissions from hostile radar systems and missile seekers. The critical 90-second window for signals intelligence processing represents a revolution in battlefield awareness. In previous conflicts, identifying and transmitting a firing position might take 15 to 30 minutes. But Ukrainian forces have compressed this timeline through integrated sensors and streamlined communication protocols. By the time those 90 seconds expire, the targeting data has already reached the appropriate strike asset. In this case, the data transmits to a waiting FPV drone operator positioned 8 km away. This represents a fundamental evolution in helicopter tactics. Rather than avoiding air defense systems, Ukrainian pilots now deliberately expose themselves to draw fire. This acceptance of risk doctrine represents a complete reversal of traditional helicopter employment. Instead of using terrain masking and standoff weapons to avoid air defenses, Ukrainian pilots now use their aircraft as bait, trusting in countermeasures and accepting potential losses to achieve the greater goal of eliminating enemy air defense networks. It's a calculated gamble that traditional military means would never teach, but it's proving devastatingly effective. The acceptance of calculated risk transforms the Mi-24 from potential victim to an active hunter that eats Iglas for breakfast. The Russian team, meanwhile, begins their standard post-engagement procedure completely, unaware that an 8-minute countdown to their elimination has started. Soviet doctrine calls for immediate relocation after firing to avoid counter-batter response. In the Cold War era, this shoot-and-scoot tactic provided reasonable safety as enemy response times measured in tens of minutes or hours. But modern surveillance technology worked. Operations have compressed this timeline to single digits. And the real genius behind this operation is about to begin. At 2:49 p.m., the FPV drone operator receives final confirmation of the target coordinates. The operator powers up a modified commercial quadcopter, its civilian origins hiding a military purpose. The 1.5-kilo warhead, attached where a camera gimbal would normally sit, represents a perfect fusion of consumer technology and military innovation. The drone lifts off and sets course for the Russian position, flying at just 50-meter altitude to avoid radar detection and visual observation. The Russian MANPADS team continues their pack-up procedure, focused entirely on their equipment, rather than security. The 9K38 EGLAS system, while man-portable, requires several critical steps to properly stow before firing. The missile's launch tube must be disconnected from the grip stock assembly. The battery coolant unit, now expended, must be safely disposed of to prevent chemical exposure. The thermal battery that powered the seeker needs removal. Each component must be secured in its carrying case for transport. This pack-up process takes between 4 and 6 minutes under ideal conditions, an eternity in modern warfare. But the muddy terrain of the Dnipro River Delta transforms this routine procedure into a nightmare. The summer rains have turned the ground into thick mud that clings to boots and equipment. The building that provided concealment and a stable firing platform now becomes a trap as the team must navigate debris and damaged stairs while carrying nearly 18 kilos of equipment. The vulnerability window inherent in MANPADS employment represents a critical weakness that Ukrainian forces identified early in the conflict. During pack-up, crews cannot simultaneously disassemble complex weapon systems and maintain situational awareness. This 4 to 6 minute period of task fixation creates an opportunity that drone operators train specifically to exploit. The distributed nature of Ukrainian operations has enabled this rapid response. Rather than following traditional military hierarchies where targeting data must flow up through battalion, brigade, and division headquarters for approval, Ukrainian forces operate with remarkable autonomy. The drone operator receives coordinates directly from signals, intelligence, and can immediately engage without waiting for a lengthy approval chain. This flat command structure, more Silicon Valley than Soviet Army, compresses decision cycles from 30 minutes to under 2 minutes. The choice of Oleski for this operation was also deliberate. On more active fronts, a MANPADS launch might go unnoticed among the chaos of continuous combat. But in this quiet sector, any significant military action receives immediate attention from intelligence. Assets Ukrainian commander specifically selected this area to ensure maximum psychological impact. Every Russian air defense team monitoring radio frequencies would soon hear what happened to crews who engaged Ukrainian aircraft. At 2:54 p.m., 6 minutes after the failed missile engagement, the Ukrainian drone approaches the target area. Through the Firsterson view feed, the operator observes 2 Russian soldiers still at their firing position, struggling with their equipment. The 17.9-kilo EGLAS system, awkward to carry even in ideal conditions, becomes nearly impossible to manage quickly in the muddy terrain. The drone's approach profile maximizes success while minimizing detection. Flying at just 50-meter altitude puts it below most radar systems. Minimum detection threshold. The quadcopter's small size and plastic construction provide minimal radar cross-section. Its electric motors produce almost no thermal signature, unlike fuel-powered aircraft or drones. But more importantly, electric motors generate a unique acoustic signature, a high-pitched whine that's only audible within 100 to 200. By the time you hear an electric drone, it's already too late. This near-silent approach until the final seconds gives targets no time to react or take cover. The Russians remain focused on their immediate task, unaware that their remaining time measures in seconds. The distributed nature of Ukrainian operations has enabled this response. Rather than centralized command structures requiring multiple approval levels, the drone operator received targeting data directly from intelligence nodes. This flat organizational structure provides the flexibility to exploit this narrow vulnerability window. Through the FPV camera, the operator makes final adjustments to ensure optimal placement. The 1.5 kg explosive device, while small by military standards, provides sufficient effect against personnel and equipment in the open. The drone accelerates toward the building, diving from its cruising altitude to maximize kinetic impact. At 2:55 p.m., 7 minutes after firing their missile, the Russians finally noticed the incoming threat. The distinctive sound of drone rotors, burned into every soldier's memory after months of combat triggers. Immediate recognition. But in the confined space near the building, carrying heavy equipment through mud, no escape route exists. They can only watch as the drone makes its final approach. The operator maintains lock through the camera feed, making final corrections, to ensure the warhead impacts exactly between the two soldiers and their equipment. The drone path is true, its purpose clear. 8 minutes ago, these men fired at a Ukrainian helicopter. Now they're in the find-out stage of their villain arc at precisely 2:56 p.m. Exactly 8 minutes after the Igla launch, the drone strikes. The 1.5 kilo warhead detonates on impact. The explosion ensures one less Ila that can fire at Ukrainian aircraft. Within hours, Russian communications traffic indicates widespread discussion among air defense units. Manpads teams throughout the sector receive new instructions. Do not engage unless explicitly ordered. This hesitation, born from fear of immediate retaliation, degrades the entire network's effectiveness. Ukrainian helicopters now operate with greater freedom, knowing that Russian operators must weigh survival against duty. Bye for now. Russia challenged Ukraine helicopter.